So what happens if the belts aren't the problem? Maybe the problem is something bigger. It is. I can get the auger to turn lightly, but under any load it won't turn, and that's because I've blown out the gearbox. Yeah, it's not supposed to do that. You can feel it skipping over some of the teeth. If you're curious to know why this happened, I had long since wrecked my original shear pins and just used 1/4-inch bolts that I had in a drawer. And then I came across this one, which is obviously a harder steel. This side is the one that did it, hit some ice or a rock or who knows what, and couldn't break the shear pin, so instead it chewed the teeth off the worm gear assembly in here. So we have to crack this thing in half to get at that gearbox. And the body separates right here. Take these bolts out on both sides. Have to get this belt off, and to do that I have to get this like retainer thing out of the way. And that should be enough. Once I've separated the body, it should just sort of split in half, and then I can start unbolting things from this front half. Just something elegant and beautiful about that. And this belt, honestly, that looks fine. Like they say, man, you should totally just change the belts because you're in there. I ain't changing that. That thing's perfect. Drive belt, not so much. But it is such a relatively easy job to get this thing apart. And the drive belt, you got to get the transmission cover off, which is underneath here, to access it. Because there's a friction wheel rubbing on the back of this that's actually doing the driving. And you have to get the belt in and around that. So because that's not the problem I'm having, it's the gearbox, I'm going to let this thing be for now. I mean, it is 15 years old. If I can get this by just changing out a $30 gear in the gearbox, I'd be happy with that. Once you've got the pulley off the back of the housing, you have to take these bolts out from the sides to separate the auger shaft from the housing, and then the whole thing should just pull out in one piece. Now, because of these silly wheels I put on here, I can't get these bolts out, at least 2 of the 4 bolts. But these collars move in and out, so no problem there. Now that I've got these all loosened off, this thing just comes out all in one piece. Cool. So here's where the impeller usually lives, and it stuffs the snow up the chute from here. The impeller shaft has like a screw gear here and a worm gear around here, and translates this motion into this motion, except this gear is shot. I'm pretty certain. Judging by the availability of replacement worm gears, that seems to be the part that breaks in the gearbox here. So, fortunately, there is only one correct way to put these auger blades on. There's multiple ways you could try, but this is the only arrangement that works. The shear pins have to go into the shaft, which don't extend the entire length of each half of the auger. So there's your shear pin. That's got to be towards the center. If you flip them left to right, then when sort of crawling forward, it would be pushing snow away from the center instead of scooping it toward the center. So that's why I marked them left and right, just to make sure. The next stage is getting this housing apart and then having a look at the gears inside. It's going to be a mess in there. I wasn't sure if I was going to have to fight to get this thing to come apart, but it looks like it's just going to happily separate for me. Oh my goodness. There's gold in them gearboxes. Yeah, there's your problem. Thankfully, the screw gear looks good, which means, exactly as I expected, the worm gear is going to be smoked. Yeah, let go of that. Oh my goodness. It's completely chewed and screwed, dude. All right, well, I have a new one of these coming in the mail. So I'm gonna have to put this project on hold. I can clean the parts at least. And this doesn't have a lot of grease in it anymore. Like, it doesn't look like it ever had a lot, to be honest. But gasket's still in one piece. I like that. That's one part I'm not going to have to replace. Gross. So, got this thing all apart and, for the most part, cleaned up. If you're real careful, you can get this gasket out without breaking it. It's not paper. It feels a bit more plasticky. But I imagine you could still damage it, and that would be a pain to replace. Look at this gear. This is just amazing. What a beating that took. Here's what the teeth should look like. There's only a few of them left. This thing got just demolished. So, problem was the shear pins. I put a hardened steel bolt in without realizing it. Or maybe I did, I don't know, and I'm just stupid. But here's the housing for the gearbox. I've cleaned all the gunk out of it. You should see the rag, it just glistens with all this brassy crap that came out of it. A few things to notice. One, there's like a grease filler port, which is normally plugged with this plastic dude here. There's little flat spots here and here that line up with each other. And then each of these has a flat spot. So when they reassemble this, make sure you line up your flat spots. Let me point you. Whoops, my bad. Here's another one. Now this flat bit is on the end of here. Or maybe it goes the other way. Yeah, I think it does. And that corresponds with that flat spot. When assembled the two sides together, you're going to have a flat spot that's for the top of this thing. So now I got to get this thing apart and get that gear off of there. I can get this thing all the way down to here before it starts binding up on the corrosion. The other side is much more corroded. I've never put grease in the grease nipples on the auger, clearly. But still, did pretty well for 15 years of use. Till, of course, this happened. The new gear fits onto the shaft with a key, which goes into this little divot right there. And it's not really difficult to get the gears or the collars on and off of this shaft. They actually slide on quite easily by hand. But I suppose if you needed help, you could use a chunk of PVC or something, which is the right diameter. This is a good size for the new gear. I could just put the gear on the shaft and then hammer it down by hitting the top of this tube. Now I don't have a grease gun, but I have a stick. So I got myself some low temperature grease and I'm just going to spread it as best I can into this thing, and then I have a little trick for how to get it into the tight spaces. Put a glob of grease in a Ziploc bag and then basically you use it like a cake decorating thing. Make sure you get the flat bit on this collar lined up with that flat spot there. And of course, make sure you do that for the other side as well when you try to button her up. Come on, in you get. There. That's more like it. Now I just need my little icing solution to get the grease down into this gap in here. Oh, that's messier than I was expecting. Again, line up your flat spot. Get in there, buddy. You got to remember there's a flat spot on this collar and on this collar. Did a little more of my kick decorating to fill in some gaps. I'm sure I have more grease in here than will fit when I close it up. And I certainly have like 3 times more grease than the original equipment manufacturer thought was necessary. Oh, one last thing. Got to make sure that one is straight. There we go. Let's get this back in one piece. Come on. Don't forget, before you put this into the impeller housing, make sure you put the auger blades on, because you can't do that afterwards. And the pièce de résistance, these shear pins. Now, this pulley very simply bolts onto the back of that impeller shaft. You roll the front half into the back half. Make sure you get this bolt lined up. There's one on each side. And then you can get your belt in place. It's got to go around this guy here. So around this side of it and around this side of the pulley as well, and over the top. And then once you've got that in place, you can put this thing back down. You want to know what's a lot easier if you don't have an extra pair of hands helping you with this job? Just take this thing off. Just don't lose any of the parts. And that's it, folks. The cover goes back on the same way it did in the other video. Not easily, but taking off the auger adjustment thing is absolutely necessary. That just makes this work so much easier to do. The impeller and gearbox does feel stiffer now, and I'm not sure if it's because the low temperature grease is not 00 grease. Maybe that's something I should have used. Or maybe there's a reason to not actually fill the gearbox all the way up. We shall find out. What I know is, if I blow out this other gear, the one that I've just put on, it's not a lot of work to take it apart and do the job over again. I'm looking forward to the next snowfall.